this video, I'll be explaining why within a Android Cordova application, you are unable to make a fetch request towards a running instance of a web server that is running locally on your computer. That was a mouthful. Anyways, so if you're essentially unable to make a request from your Cordova applications towards your web server localhost, I found the solution to this problem. So, just to briefly describe the problem that I was facing, within my Android Cordova application, as you can see here, I'm making a fetch request, right? Simple fetch call. And so towards production, as you can see here, towards the actual website, the fetch request had no issues and the call was being made and it was functioning as needed. The issue was when I was doing a fetch request towards my localhost, the code was breaking. So I'll be showing on the mobile app how it was breaking. So as you saw, the app breaks, and in order to fix this, it's quite, it makes sense. It makes sense. So the first issue is that you're running it under a Android context, right? So when your Android app does this call right here, when it references localhost, the localhost that it's actually referencing is the Android operating system. So because your Android operating system is not an instance of a web server that is actually running, and it does not have a web server that is running on the either emulator that you're using or the physical phone that you're using to make the tests, therefore the API call won't work. There is no web server localhost that's running. You're not referencing anything. You're referencing the phone, which is an Android operating system. So that doesn't make sense. That's why it errors out. So the actual way you make a fetch call to the proper computer or instance is by using the actual IP. So I'll be switching over to the new code. That way we'll be able to compare. So as you can see here in the new code, the IP is set right here, and also there are some differences also in the way the fetch is constructed, right? So you might have noticed here that I'm using no longer fetch, but I'm using a plugin. I'm using a plugin called the Cordova plugin Advanced HTTP plugin. And this plugin enables me to make a fetch call using the send request method. So you set it up like this, and you set the endpoint that you want to hit, and then there's a slight difference in the way the response syntax is kind of structured. So in the second parameter of the function or of the method, the response is within that parameter set as a inner parameter of a callback function. So there you have it. Whereas if we go back to the original code, in the original code it was assigned to a variable. So it was assigned to the variable response and it wasn't set within a callback function. So as you can see here, there'll be slight modifications between the way you use fetch and the way you use the send request method. And as you can see here, because I'm manipulating file data, I'm returning the blob essentially of the response. Whereas in the other better code, I essentially return the response within a promise that resolves with the new blob set with the response data. So the structure is kind of different, but essentially does the same thing. Not much of a difference. The key thing to keep in mind is that the fetch API method or library or API or whatever you want to call it changes from fetch to Cordova plugin HTTP send request, and that the actual IP of the endpoint needs to be used within the call essentially. So I hope that made sense. And then so I'll be actually running this code right here to show you how it works right now. So as you saw with the new code, it functioned really good and it did the call it needed to do. But there was also some permissions that had to be edited also in order for the system to function. So the first thing that needed to be edited was within the Cordova HTML main script. A content security policy permission needed to be set, which was the connect source. So within the connect source, you need to specify the endpoint URL that you're looking to connect to. So here I specify the HTTP IP port number of the instance that I'm running, and essentially this just says, yes, Cordova app, you are allowed to make requests to that IP and connect to it, essentially. So the second permissions that needs to be done is within the main config file of your Cordova application. And essentially, when I enter it right here, under essentially it's just an XML file, right? And under the config, where is it? The platform name Android, you set a config and you set use clear text traffic as true. And essentially what this does, it's a permission to enable HTTP connections, because by default HTTP connections aren't allowed within the Cordova platform. Only HTTPS calls and connections are allowed within the Cordova Android platform. So by adding this permission right here, you're essentially enabling connections through HTTP localhost or towards your computer, to be more exact. So that was the second configuration to be done, and that's pretty much it. I hope this video helped, and see you on the next video.